It's time now for any questions. In the chair is Jonathan Dimbleby.
Welcome to Cheadle Hulme, which is just to the southwest of Stockport and not that far from Manchester Airport. We are the guests here of Cheadle Hulme School with some 1,500 pupils. It converted to academy status in 2012 and this year, for the second time in 3 years, has been awarded outstanding status. On our panel, Grant Shapps is chairman of the Conservative Party, and in that role, incidentally, amongst many other things, he's ruled out any pact or deal with UKIP after the next election. Lisa Nandy used to work for the homeless charity Centrepoint, then at the Children's Society, which focuses on the challenges facing young refugees. She entered Parliament at the last election to become one of the 6 Asian women in the House, where she is now Shadow Minister for the Cabinet Office. Molly Scott-Cato was Professor of Strategy and Sustainability at Roehampton University before being elected as an MEP for the Green Party last May. Scott Fletcher is an entrepreneur and a winner of numerous business awards, including being named as the North West's Entrepreneur of the Year. He set up his IT company ANS from scratch at the age of 22 in 1996. It now serves thousands of clients with iCloud data and security services, has a staff of 200, a turnover of 50 million, and a profit margin of 10%. But by my bad mathematics, it makes about 5 million a year. Am I right?
It's on its way up. Should always be the case.
Did you expect to get that far when you started?
No. We were in a back bedroom in somewhere in Manchester, so absolutely not. I would have been happy with £100,000, I think.
OK. There's our panel. Could we please have our first question?
Hi, my name's Izzy, and my question is, in the light of recent claims by Stuart Rose and Stefano Pessina that Labour are anti-business, how would a Labour government benefit businesses?
How would a Labour government benefit businesses? I'll start with the Labour Party representative. How would you, Lisa Nandy, given what all the business community, or so many of the business community leaders are saying?
Well, I have to say, first of all, that as a local MP not very far from here in Wigan, I work very closely with small and large businesses in my community, and that's what the Labour Party has always done across the country. And, you know, the truth is that we're a party that was founded by working people for working people, and working people by definition need somewhere to work. So there is just no truth in the idea that Labour is anti-business. In fact, this country does best when the interests of business and the interests of working people are aligned. And in practice, what that means, I think, in 2015, is it means that we need more support for small businesses. We should cut business rates and give them a bit more of a fighting chance. We need to make sure that there is a well-supported, well-educated, well-treated workforce across the country, and that we should level the playing field for business and give them access to more opportunities, and that means being in Europe, at the heart of Europe, having an influence and an impact and being able to reform it.
Why, if you are so pro-business, why do you think that so many of your people who've supported you in the past are saying things like Sir Charles Dunstan, Car Warehouse, says he's frightened by the prospect of Labour. Assam Allen gave you 210,000, says a 50p tax will drive brains out of Britain. Have they not got it, or is Ed Miliband not getting it across?
Well, there'll always be business people with their own views. Some will support us and some won't. In fact, in the last few years, one of the most interesting things, I think, is that we've been able to draw on the talents of people in the business world, whether they support us or not. So we've had people who've run reviews for us into the infrastructure that's needed, into small business. Some of them are Labour supporters and voters, some of them aren't. And that's as it should be. Business people will always have their view, and sometimes they'll support us and sometimes they won't. Where we have differences, it's right that we should say so. But the truth is, the big priority for business in this election is about whether we stay in Europe, at the heart of Europe, changing it for the better. And on that, the only party that is guaranteed to deliver for business is the Labour Party.
Businessman Scott Fletcher.
Yeah. Well, I think when we hear from people in the Labour Party about things like rising tax and higher public sector spending, you just have to worry, do they really understand what is needed to get us through the next 5 years? And I think business people are really, they've lost confidence in the leadership of the Labour Party. And I think that is the truth. However, having said that, in the North West, the Labour Party has done brilliantly in getting investment in skills, getting a local city deal. So I think, this isn't party politics. This is actually what's good for the UK, and we need to make sure that public sector spending is at a manageable level, not 50% of GDP, but more like 40%, and it's maintained there. And we don't allow us to have an open chequebook and government officials make promises that they can't deliver on.
Do you share the anxiety or the more than anxiety of some of these business leaders who've spoken out and been rather sharply rebuked by Ed Miliband for so doing?
Well, I have a personal experience. I ran my business from the age of 22, and the Labour Party got rid of something called taper relief when they came into power, which meant that my tax rate for something that I'd built up over 20 years almost went from 10% to 40% overnight for something that I'd already done. So these are the things that I'm scared about as an entrepreneur, not just for me, but for the young people who are setting up businesses who are coming through now. We're trying to fly the flag for Manchester and the North to get technology businesses and start-ups, and we want this to really work. Now, if we're going to have young people worried about, well, I don't know what the landscape's going to look like. We need to have consistency of policy. We need to have consistency of real, true business ethics that will drive young people to start in business and deliver on the promises of our young people that we have.
Molly Scott Cato.
Well, from the Labour Party's point of view, I'm not so sure that these attacks are doing them a lot of harm, because the commentary at the moment seems to suggest that for Labour to win the election, they're going to have to actually move to the left and identify themselves more clearly with working people. And so these attacks by some of the leaders of big business, I'm not sure necessarily are harming them. But for me, I think the important point is that we're not talking about business as some kind of amorphous whole here. I think we need to distinguish between the small businesses that Lisa was mentioning and the big sort of corporate businesses where the attacks are coming from. And I mean, in my work in the European Parliament, I see, particularly in the case of tax avoidance, the power of big corporations to reduce their costs by avoiding paying their taxes, which means that the small businesses who actually create most of the jobs in this country simply can't compete. So, for example, if you run a coffee shop in the High Street in Stroud, where I live, you're having to compete with Starbucks, which can obviously charge less because it involves itself in some transfer pricing and therefore doesn't have to pay as much. And so the competition simply isn't fair. So I would like to see a situation where there was a level playing field for smaller businesses, and I would like to see an economy where we didn't see so much power from the corporations, and particularly the transnational corporations.
Grant Shapps, you were described by Ed Miliband as the chairman of not you personally, of a, quote, party of Mayfair hedge funds and Monaco tax avoiders.
Look, I mean, Ed Miliband's now very good at throwing these insults around at us or at business in general. But the truth of the matter is that 750,000 new businesses in this country over the last 5 years, and it's not happened by chance, it's happened because we've been pro-business, because we understand one simple truth. Without business, you don't get jobs. And it's a truth which has existed for a very long time, and there have been periods during which the Labour Party has seemed to understand this more, and periods where they haven't. But there's a simple fact that every single Labour government in history has ended up leaving unemployment higher. Why? Because rather than supporting business, cutting corporation tax, taking £2,000 off national insurance, making it easier to get into business by cutting thousands of rules and regulations, and therefore supporting jobs, and therefore creating wealth, and therefore being able to pay for the NHS and education, all those other services. Rather than doing that, Ed Miliband spends his time going around, insulting business, throwing up all sorts of barriers, and I think he would be an unmitigated disaster if he ever becomes Prime Minister of this country for business.
As a matter of fact, can I just clarify? Hedge funds are a butt like banks are, certainly for Ed Miliband. Do you have a view about hedge funds that is perfectly? You take a lot of money from them. You take 19 billion from about 27 of them as a party. Million. I said million. I think. Well, I meant to say million if I didn't. Sorry. Do you regard hedge funds as a making an important contribution to the economy, or as they're being described by Ed Miliband?
Which is, by the way, just to correct one thing, most of our funding, much more of our funding, also comes from ordinary members paying their membership, people from donating money in small amounts online and elsewhere, also in the region of millions. But look, hedge funds and everybody else in this country have to pay their way. We have introduced 26 separate measures to deal with aggressive tax avoidance, including several which mean that, for example, a boss of a hedge fund who under the previous government would pay less than their cleaner now doesn't, because we did something about capital gains tax. So we actually have quite a long record of making sure that people are having to pay and companies are having to pay their fair share. We've got a new tax will come in which will prevent companies from showing zero profits and moving the money offshore, for example. But the simple fact of the matter is this: you can't create jobs unless you allow business to operate and flourish. And the fact that Ed Balls was unable to name a single business person apart from Bill somebody the other day on Newsnight is evidence, if you ever needed any, that actually Labour will be a disaster for business. They'll do what François Hollande's done in France, which is to drive business out. They've had more businesses go bust in the last 12 months than in history, and unemployment in France is pushing twice the rate of Britain. Is that what we really want? I don't think we do.
Lisa, can I pick you up on a point that was actually raised by Margaret Hodge today, who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, accusing PricewaterhouseCoopers of tax avoidance schemes on an industrial scale being sold, and then noting that a great many of the senior figures in the Labour Party, given Ed's view on hedge funds, it's interesting, are actually employing or have as on work experience or in pretty cheap terms employees of Price. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I'm not going up against Margaret Hodge anytime soon. But I think there's no point in pretending that this is something that's an issue for one party or another. This is an issue for the country.
Yeah, but you can't get rid of the fact that it's an issue for you if it's for one party. Let me you say you won't get away with it. She said it's inappropriate.
Sure.
For instance, members, we know Ed Balls, Chukwuemeka have had a lot of money, both key business people, from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Is that appropriate or inappropriate that you do that? She says, I wouldn't do it.
Well, the point is that if we get into government in May, we will do something about tax avoidance, and that is wherever you find it.
So
and
you
whoever
it
affects. I don't think, Jonathan, after the last week that we've had and the headlines that there have been and the attacks by the Conservative Party, I don't think that anyone can be in any doubt that Labour thinks that business should pay its taxes.
Yeah, but are you happy as a shadow minister that your colleagues who are shadow ministers are taking money from a company, a firm, which is openly accused of coming up with schemes to allow companies to avoid taxes?
No, well, look, the point is that we have to do something about the system. Yes. It's no use just going after individuals. You have to do something about the system. And it's what Molly just said a moment ago, is that at the moment we don't have a level playing field. So the small business in my constituency does pay its taxes, does play by the rules, and there are many other big businesses that do that as well. And there ought to be a level playing field. And that's wherever you find tax avoidance, we ought to be acting to stamp it out. This government really hasn't done anything about it at all.
Yeah.
Apart from 26 separate measures that you could have taken at any time during the previous 13 years.
Tax avoidance isn't illegal. We all avoid tax. We bring in green taxes to make people avoid those taxes, so we do different things. The bottom line is the system is broken. And the tax system, it has expanded from one small book to many, many books. So, of course, PricewaterhouseCoopers set up schemes to help people to avoid the tax and understand those laws. If we simplify the tax system, we get something a lot more easy to understand, and people will pay their taxes. I'm blooming sure about it.
I would just like to say,
apart from the bigger guy, okay, I'll take that. The bigger guys, we need to do it, but I'm talking about small business people, real people who have started businesses.
But
we will pay our taxes.
This is the point, that the big guys are actually setting the rules over taxes. They're doing negotiations with states, with Luxembourg, for example, in fact, with a lot of states across Europe. We've been working very hard in the European Parliament to get a full-scale inquiry into this. And I have to say that all the other big parties have not worked with us on that. And so, Grant may have made some small changes, but we're talking about €1 trillion that weren't paid in tax. Now, we're living in times of austerity where we're told we can't fund our public services properly. But the European Commission, hardly some radical left-wing think tank has said that €1 trillion is not paid in tax every year. We have to stop this. And both these parties are just bickering now about who's going to deal with this. But we must, I think, as the public, make it clear that we will not accept this tax avoidance. And I think, it used to be acceptable to do drink driving. It used to be socially acceptable. We changed that. We have to similarly make it socially unacceptable to try to avoid paying your taxes, whether you're rich or whether you're a large business or whoever you are.